Hello everyone, my name is Amanda Kruger. I am the Assistant Coordinator here for National History Day in Wisconsin. I'm here to talk to you today about going beyond Google, research for National History Day. Our agenda, first we're going to be talking about National History Day research and how it's different, and diving into those primary and secondary sources that we stress for students. Then we're going to be talking about physical resources, where you can find them in Wisconsin and how to access them, as well as some that you might not know about. Next, we're going to do internet research done right, pushing students to resources that they already have available, and then also talking about how they can use Google strategically. We're going to be talking about that annotated bibliography and those three components that make a good annotation. Finally, we're going to be talking about next steps and how to bring this into your classroom. So, National History Day. How is the research different? It's different for students and teachers alike, and that is individualized research. So, students become the expert on their topics. They become the historians, being the ones telling other students and teachers and judges alike that things that we might not know about, but don't feel stressed that you need to be an expert, that you need to know the facts on all these things. What students need help with typically are skills-based. Having students struggle with research and finding and identifying primary documents with bias, that's a good point where teachers can provide guidance. Often looking at analysis and showing the background and impact of topics is hard for students, and definitely teachers step in there as well. The academic quality is often a struggle for students, where they might only know their textbook for academic quality until now. So challenging them to read at a higher level, or looking at academic in the way at, is there bias in this source? It's good for students to identify. On that same train, we have interacting with primary sources. A lot of students have never done their own analysis before, and they might not know that maybe a lot of sources have a bias. Finally, we're going to push students to explore beyond Wikipedia and Wikiquote. They're often a great place for students to start to get that quick summary and kind of move on from there. So we often encourage students to look at it and then go straight to the bibliography down at the bottom. Start going into deeper research right away. On to primary sources. We stress primary sources a lot because students might not interact with them otherwise. They might be just used to their textbook telling them the facts right away. But primary sources, as we explain to students, are created during the time period or were present during the time period. So students might get an interview with a person who lived through the event. And so that counts as a primary source. Another good primary source that they might identify is, Anne Frank's diary that's available in many public libraries, maybe even your school library. However, there are some common struggles with primary sources that we see. Students might not understand that there might be missing information in that article. There might be misinformation as well, where someone was leaving out something. That's equally important. Or there might be bias. So what we might encourage is looking at maybe article, a newspaper article, or a political cartoon, and having students identify, what did the author mean by this? Are they trying to sway favor by that? Another common struggle is not all information is digitalized yet. There are great strides in the last couple of years, but definitely students might struggle in finding primary sources. We also want to stress that it's not just photos. Students might rely heavily on photos for topics that have a lot of images, but we also want to see some different things. Newspaper articles is something that we ask a lot of students include in their exhibits, websites, and else, is because then we get to see how did the people react right away. What information did they have available to them? Newspaper articles are also pretty easy to find online and are accessible to many students, whereas other primary sources might not be. Now, secondary sources. Students are often very familiar with textbooks, but telling them that secondary sources are created after the date and include more analysis. So there might be newspaper articles that are about an older topic. There's interviews with historians. Those are secondary sources and often bulk up a student's bibliography. However, there are some common struggles with secondary sources as well. We see reliability and analysis as a common struggle. That students might find some secondary sources that maybe the analysis isn't very strong. Another one students talk about is repeat information, especially in websites, where it seems like the author just copied and pasted another website's information, or how Wikipedia is kind of composed of a bunch of different information combined into one site. So, let's talk about some physical resources that you can maybe start with for students. Local colleges are great that students can sometimes get their first experience on a college campus, or they can talk to a historian for the first time, getting that interview in. Local colleges often have a library or maybe archives available as well. You'll have to check though. Local museums are also pretty good. It's good for students maybe to talk to a curator or a historian there as well, but it's also great for students that might be doing an exhibit, showing students what a museum-style exhibit, which is how we call our exhibits as well, what those look like in an actual museum. So that's pretty cool. We also have libraries all across the state. You likely have one in your school, one in your town, or there's a college library near you. All those librarians, though, are a good resource. They can pull books for students that they know might be useful. Maybe starting your class off with research one day with all books that they can't go online one day. These are great for secondary materials that are pretty trustworthy, that have been published. They also have access to wider databases that we might not have. Now, the Wisconsin Historical Society has a lot of information and things that you might not know about. On our campus, we have actually a lot of information about the Civil Rights era, Hollywood, and others that you might not identify right away. We also do research field trips, but I want to dive more into this Area Research Center. So, Area Research Centers are located all across the state. You can likely find your county highlighted in one of these regions below. And at these area research centers, which are several of them are UW locations and otherwise, we can get primary documents or artifacts from any location to another. So a student that might be particularly motivated, it might be good for them to, get information that was held at the Madison Historical Society up to you guys to look at. So you can access it online, make those requests, and view that information at your local area. Some of them are pretty close. Some might be a larger distance. It might be good for a field trip instead. Now, diving into those online sources, now that we've covered physical sources, we want to stress that students shouldn't only rely on online sources, but we understand that it's an equalizing factor, that students might have just an availability to online sources at home easier. So the rule of thumb that we often go off of is .edu, .gov, .org, or a recognizable publisher is the best sites for students to cite in a bibliography. Another good way for students to kickstart their research is looking on those school databases that we're going to be discussing in a minute, or have students add the words history or primary sources into their searches. It's amazing the difference in the Google search between Rosa Parks and Rosa Parks primary sources. We can see it in a bibliography after the student's done it. So, what we can start with is online resources, Badgerlink, and newspaper archive. Badgerlink is available for any student that has a public library card. It already has EBSCO, which you may know is a database that has a ton of magazines, newspapers, images, and other reference sources that maybe students wouldn't have access otherwise. And that's all with just a public library card. Within Badgerlink, you can access Newspaper Archive, which is on the right here. So this is great that it goes Students can search easily online for a primary source. It goes all the way back to the 1700s. So students might not be able to find a lot of information about their topic, or at least they don't think they'll find a lot of primary sources, but newspapers can really bulk it up, and they might find out a lot more about their topic as well. Now, additional online sources, which would be good for students to start with, is IPL. It's the Internet Public Library. It searches only sites that have been pre-screened by librarians, which is great that the students are looking at reliable information. Although it may not have as many results, the higher quality, and also students might not get overwhelmed then. A student Googling Rosa Parks might read the same information 100 times. But if they just get 5 sources, that it's better quality, and it might be new perspectives as well. Now, Google Books. Google Books is pretty great in that it's already, as of October 2015, scanned book titles of 25 million plus. Unfortunately, a lot of it is just select pages and titles that are viewable online. It might be good for students, though, in starting off research, that they're able to view a certain amount of a book, a certain paragraph or quote, and then try to find it at a local library or through interlibrary loan. More sites that are good for research will bring up kind of different things. We've already talked about newspaper articles. You can probably find images pretty easily, but a lot of these sites featured on this page might bring up different things students might not think of to look at. The Library of Congress archives have a lot of information about American history and government documents, which are great primary sources. Digital Public Library of America is very user-friendly and good for students to start off with, and looks pretty deep into some different topics. The National Archives, just like the Library of Congress, has been running for a very long time and has a good selection of different things and artifacts and government documents that we might not have access to otherwise. The FBI has recently declassified a lot of information, and it has put it on the site called The Vault. The Vault has government documents that students might be really interested in that they might not think of otherwise. Here, there's Martin Luther King's security analysis that the FBI did in the 1960s. It has Al Capone's criminal record and all the information they collected on him through wiretaps. It's really interesting and cool for students to look at. They might think that's really fun too. National Security Archive through George Washington University also has really great selection of different government documents or, international cables and things that you might not think of right away or might not be able to find through a Google search. So, we've been talking about Google a lot, but how do we get students to use it strategically? We're going to be going through some tips. A lot of students will call these hacks, and how you can really narrow down results and save time. So the first one is searching exact phrases. It's really great for finding original quotes. You type into Google around quotation marks exactly what you're looking for, and it'll narrow down the results that way. Excluding a word. Some students complain especially about a lot of repeat information. So if you had enough information about a certain topic, you can put a hyphen, kind of a minus sign, before the word about your topic. So I'm interested in learning about Teddy Roosevelt, but I got enough information on Cuba. So I minus Cuba, and I get a lot more information about him in the environmental field, which is pretty interesting to me. Here we can also search a specific domain. So let's say I find the National Archives really interesting and got a lot of good stuff from it, but it's really hard for me to use. So I type in site, and I type in the website I'm looking at, which is archives.gov, and I type in what I'm looking for, Rosa Parks photo. So I don't have to do all the clicking and finding it myself. Google will find it for me. Generating similar content. So if we found a site we like, we want to search related sites. What we do is type in the word related and then the site we were looking at. So here I put in the Smithsonian primary sources. You see right away it brings up a ton of other primary source websites that I can use. All very helpful. Now we're going to be searching for words in text. So what that means is all in text is that the website must include all the words I just wrote. But it doesn't have to be in the same order, like the quotations one. So all in text, I'm looking for all those words have to be included in the website. Otherwise, Google might just throw out what words fit together and what make the most popular searches, but I know that I want these words included. Just like the last one, this is all in title. So this will definitely narrow down a search. So if I'm looking for something that's more popular, like Martin Luther King, but I want to throw in something that's maybe not as popular, like labor. So it will draw up only sites that have in their title Martin Luther King and labor. It also makes it pretty trustworthy as well. Now, news by location. This is good for students that might be doing international topics or looking for a long-term current impact. So this one I'm looking at location. I'm looking at South Africa, Johannesburg, and Mandela. And this will bring me up current information about that area and about my topic. The next one is image search. A lot of students will find a great image, but it might be located on an untrustworthy site. We want to make sure it's not Photoshop or edited in any way. So we're going to search in Google. We take the image, we drag it up to the Google search bar, and it will search Google for me. It will look at all the sites and see if that same image is used and bring up a new search list for me. Reverse Google image search is kind of related to the last one, but a lot of students will wind up using this when they're creating their bibliographies at the end. If they forgot to include an annotation or a citation for an image, they can upload it to Google. When you go on googleimage.com, you can click the little camera button and you hit upload image and you choose your file, upload it, and Google will search for that image on its sites. Now, we talked a lot about the Annotated Bibliography up till now, but let's dive more into it. A lot of students will already be familiar with MLA, and so they can choose from MLA or Chicago citations. It doesn't matter to us. You can probably choose in the classroom which one they want to use. And then the first thing that we're going to ask is that students divide their bibliographies into two sections. We want to see primary sources and secondary sources separate. This helps us looking at their bibliography, because then we see, is it balanced research? What did they get from their primary sources? What did they get from their secondary sources? And how does that differ? So we stressed it a lot before, but make sure it's stressed throughout. Do students have a lot of primary sources and secondary sources? It's kind of easy to look at if we look at their bibliography that way. A lot of you might already be familiar with EasyBib or BibMe. Those online sites are just fine. Just make sure students are saving their work, because we'd hate for a student to lose it one day. Another tool that is now available is Noodletools. They have an exclusive partnership with National History Day, and so students can use this. It has some really cool features, and it's an online platform that a lot of students might find interesting or you might want to try out. Go ahead. It's free for anyone doing National History Day. We have an exclusive partnership, as I mentioned, so go ahead, check it out. If you want to use it, it's not required, obviously. Students are welcome to use EasyBib as much as Noodletools. There's no preference for us. Now, we've talked a lot of different parts of annotation and annotated bibliography, but what makes a good annotation? What we want to see are three components. First, does it identify what kind of sources it is? In MLA format, it usually says, but we just want to know, is it a song? Is it a poem? Is it a book? Second, how was that source used? What did the student use from it? Some students might just recognize right away that it was just a portrait or an image that they used from the site. Then finally, how did the source help you understand your topic and create your project? This one's kind of more in depth, but don't feel like you need to stress it anymore. Let's look at another one for this. Under the same student's bibliography, we see their secondary sources. Let's look at this annotation. So this one right away says this site, so that checks off the first criteria, provided lots of information on the history of vaccines. So we already know that they used the information from the site in the history of vaccines, particularly vaccines before the 19th century. The information on the earliest vaccines was very important to us in tracing the evolution of the vaccine. So we know that the students used the topic, the website, and they had a lot more information about the history of vaccine. Specifically, this website was important to them for tracing the evolution of the vaccine. So it's clear how it helped them create their project. In their previous one, they just said they used the image. Both are good quality annotations. We just want to see these 3 analysis points. Often students will get, a little afraid of this part, but it can be easily done through journal entries or, building up while you do research. Just don't leave it till the end. Then it's kind of intimidating, but annotations are usually just 1 to 2 sentences, sometimes 3 if it's really useful. And it's good for students just to, say what they used, what did they find interesting. It's a good way to draw out more of the research they've done and really show off, all the information and research they've done so far. So, giving you guys kind of a sneak peek at annotated bibliography judging. There's no necessarily amount of length or number of sources cited that we want to see. It's the quality of sources that we want to see. And how depth research is it? A lot of times we'll say Christopher Columbus is a good example of someone that might not have a lot of primary sources, but secondary sources are definitely useful for him. Martin Luther King has a ton of sources out there about him, but how did that person narrow down? Did they look at all the information out there for Martin Luther King? How much analysis did they do? So that balance of research is really important. And how did they use those primary sources available to them? Did they really do good analysis? Did they get interviews? Or was it a lot of websites? Just looking at the balance of what kind of sources, primary or secondary, but also, was it books? Was it maps? Was it songs? Was it data? Was it government documents? And how did they balance it that way? Our website, nhd.org, has a lot more information about the annotated bibliography if your students are struggling at all, too. Now, discussing these next steps. We really promote that students start the annotated bibliography right away. You can kind of kickstart this with your students, too, and research. Talk to your librarian. Maybe you could pull some books and you guys kickstart your research with a book day where students have to only look at books during the class period. Otherwise, you can start digging into EBSCO databases, other things that your librarian might know you guys have access to. Also, speaking with librarians, you might want to look into, do you guys have interlibrary loan at your local library or your school library? That way, students can get information from all across the state or across the nation. Also, you want to see those local research centers that we talked about. Would they be good for possible research field trips? Things like that. What we want to stress is that there's a lot of information online, a lot of resources that you guys have available to you. On our own website, we have a whole site, a web page that's dedicated to different types of research. So the little GIF on the right is our site. It's the online resources for NHD students. We kick it off with the sites that we already talked about. It digs into the Wisconsin websites that we didn't discuss. US history has a lot of sites that students can find a lot more on. And then next, we have more sites that are more specific. There's European history, there's ancient history, there's history of science that maybe it might be a struggle for students to find more good resources online for. So look at our site, talk to your librarians. We would love to learn more, discuss with you guys, have any questions, please let us know. You can contact us at our email here or by phone. So best of luck on your research. Please let us know how we can help and have a great day.